thank you very much. We had to unplug some things to make this work, but I'm going to deal with a little bit of reality stuff. I hope not to bring people down, but just tell you the way it was and the way it is with the southern resident killer whales. And we'll see how to change this thing. I think space bar. Oh, that doesn't do it. Maybe I do an arrow. Maybe I do that arrow. Yeah. Okay, the basics. And Mike Biggs started this study in 1973, and I just followed his footsteps and learned from him. Learned a lot of things. But basically, in the first 14 years of study, Peter Alesiuk looked at all of our data for the northern and the southern residents and came up with sort of a demographic profile of killer whale. That was what people were looking for, was how long do they live, how many babies do they have, when do they sexually mature, etc. He found that females had a mean life expectancy of about 50. They start producing viable calves at about 15 and have an average 5.35 calves in a 25-year reproductive lifespan, and then they live post-reproductively to 80 or 90. I'm just going to focus on females, and I'll blow this chart up a little bit, if it'll go. Yeah. Basically, we began this, I don't know, can you see this little laser pointer dot here? That data covers this first third of this graph, and this is years as we proceed along, the beginning year 1976 and all the way up to 2014. The blue bars are indicative of the increases or the births to the population, up to upwards of 9 in 1977, 9 babies born. And the red indicates the mortalities. And then all these numbers up here, J40, K37, and so on, L, so on, indicate who the individuals are that are in these bars, the births and the deaths. And we see that most of them actually are L whales. And in fact, you've all seen this population graph where we started at about 70, 71 whales and went almost to 100 by 1995, and then it started back down. And then they were declared endangered in 2005. And it's been doing this seesaw, but on its way back down again. And the primary driver of that whole population number is L-pod. We have K-pod in red here, they're relatively stable, and J-pod in blue is slightly increasing, but it's L-pod that is the driver of this whole thing. I'll blow that chart up a little bit. I want to spend a little bit of time on this because it has basically all the information you need. The red boxes here with the numbers in them are adult females. The blue boxes are adult males. The pink boxes are juvenile females. And the baby blue are young males. And these little small boxes are what we call tombstones. They're whales that have died during this entire study. And this is just L-pod. So we take L-pod and just draw a line across the middle here. I've arranged it so that we have the relatively non-viable matrolines in the bottom half of this picture. But you can see why they're non-viable. Like, for example, here's L88, a male, nobody left in his whole family. We have one adult female here, 20 years old, L90, 22 years old actually. She's probably had 2 pregnancies, both of them difficult, lost them. She actually probably had more. And she doesn't seem to be able to produce a calf. And similarly, L91 doesn't seem to produce. And then some of the production that we do see is just boys. That's not going to go anywhere in terms of a matroline. Whereas above the line here, we do have some hope, but we're waiting for these whales maybe another 10 years or so before they grow up and have babies, anything in pink. And the ones that are in solid red should be having a baby pretty soon, for example L103. And we do know that, for example, L86, we take a specific whale here. She had a boy in 2005, L106, and she had a girl, L112. And then, you know, she tragically died from some sort of blunt force trauma that was probably a bomb or a grenade. And then she had a calf in September that died, L120. So in short, we have 18 whales below the line, 7 of which are adult females. However, 3 of them are reproductively senescent, and 2 have not had a calf in a decade, and 2 others are, they're reproductively aged, but they're not producing babies. So the prognosis for that entire group below the line is not good. And there are also 50 tombstones. 73% of the whales that we've seen in that group are now dead. There are 14 L-pod whales above the line. 8 of them are adult female, and 4 are demonstrated successful mothers. And 2 are clearly senescent. From the 4 mothers, we might hope for as much as 8 babies to be born in the next 10 years. About, on the average, half would be male and half female. And there are also 3 young females that in about 10 years might start producing babies. But all I'm saying is, well, we can go to the next slide. For the next 10 years, we're not going to expect a lot out of L-pod, if anything. If we lose all the 18 whales below the line and gain the 10 babies, is the population going up or down? It's still going down. If we retain the whales below the line, but the fecundity doesn't improve above the line, is it getting better or worse? You're just feeding 18 more whales, but not really having much production. Regrettably, my prognosis is that L-pod is not going to be significantly increasing in the next decade or 2. K-pod, they're actually not going anywhere either. K21 over here is the last of the Mohicans in his major line. Obviously, there's no growth possible in that family tree. This one is heavy with boys, and it's questionable whether there's going to be a future there. These groups were tied together by the female, which is now dead, but again, pretty heavy with males, and we've got to wait for K36 to start producing. So we've got at least a decade before we see some improvement there. So J-pod is the one with the most hope. The major lines here were tied together by J4, who's long deceased now, but this was one major line, and this was one major line, the J5, J10s. Currently, we'll start with the ones that are non-viable, the J22s. They just have boys. They're not going anywhere. J32, who died in December, was the real hope. But she had a female fetus, and the fetus died and then caused her death. The J16s, as we know, we have J50 now, that was born just before the new year. And there was some question as to whether or not this female, J16, is the mother, or her daughter, J36. But we've seen J50 consistently with J16, so she's at least the primary caregiver. And in fact, in pilot whales, related species, there is lactation after menopause. They can wet nurse other babies. So it's not beyond the question. And so we'll just have to wait for a fecal sample or something from J50 to see what the genetics tell us, whether it's 16 or 36. Right now, she's getting her care from 16, and 36 is kind of hanging in the background. Well, anyway, out of the, we can go to the sort of summary of this. If we look at J-pod, we see that at the beginning of the study, we had 4 basic matrilines in this family tree, and we still have basically the 4, although they've split, you know, the mothers of matriarchs have died. But it's still viable. It's still available for future growth. K-pod, they had also 4 matrilines at the beginning, and 2 of those are a little iffy, but they're maybe viable. This one is one kind of questionable, and one is certainly not viable. So that's why we say it doesn't really hold much for the future. And let me back up if I can. L-pod summary here. That one, we had 12 matrilines, 7 of them were viable at the beginning of the study. Currently about 3 are viable, and the rest are basically mouths to feed. And the ultimate driver really of this is how we intimated, and as I'm increasingly saying, is Chinook salmon abundance. These whales are obligate predators on Chinook salmon. They will not survive without Chinook salmon. And now you can feed Lolita 10% Chinook salmon in a tank and just pump her up with donuts and stuff. But it isn't going to make a population. And in fact, about Lolita, the thing that I think ought to be just immediately gained from any records that we have is how many times has she ovulated over the years. We really need to get a handle on what is happening in the reproduction of these whales. Anyway, back to the story here. Across the top line, we have all the mortalities, the red bars on that earlier chart. The longer the line, the more whales died. And then on the bottom here, we have the coast-wide Chinook salmon abundance, catches and the escapement. When we have 4 to upwards of 6 million fish in the ecosystem, there's good survival. When we drop below 4 million, especially, there is poor survival in the killer whales. If we got a hold of a database that covers the 50 years from 1951 to 2001. For most of these years, there were 4 million or upwards of 6 million fish available in the ecosystem. Now we have to remember that these whales fish out in front of humans, or before the rivers. They get first dibs on the fish if they're there. But if they're not there, there's not much they can do about it, except swim to California or something. Here's what the human harvests have been in those same years using that same graph. We're taken up to 4 million. In fact, up here, the percentage of the catch is consistently above 50% of all the fish available, and sometimes almost 90% of the fish available. That's what humans are taking. And then the whales are trying to eat out front of that. But the problem is that all of the fish stocks then are being impacted seriously, if not endangered or extinct already. Half of them are already extinct. Here we've extended the timeline from 51 all the way up to 2013 using Pacific Fisheries Management Council data to show that basically we're below this 4 million fish mark pretty much all the time. And overall, 58% of the whales that we had at the beginning of the study and all that we've seen during the study are now dead. 66% of the L-pod whales are deceased. About 52% of the K-pods and 48% of the J-pod whales. So J-pod has done better than the other two by far. My take-home message to the government folks now, for which I prepared this presentation, was that if we want future generations of humans to have a chance to see these whales, we have to get fully behind salmon restoration in all of the eastern Pacific watersheds, particularly those that were once abundant with salmon. No fish, no blackfish is the theme of the story. And I want to thank Jane Cogan for the data analysis and graphics. And then I had one more slide for the idiots that believe that whale watching is causing their demise. And that is just this year's data, this past year, on presence of the different pods, which is pretty much the way it's been over the years. In the 180 days available from April to September, J-pod was around, I'd say 109 days. Our southern residents were around 109 days. J-pod was there virtually every one of those. K-pod was there about 36% of the days, and L-pod was about 25% of the days. And just for comparison, residents versus transients, we had more transients around this year than we've had previously. And they're doing fine. Demographically, they're increasing. The population is probably 250 of them now. But of course, their food supply is abundant. There's seals all over the place, and sea lions and porpoises that comprise their diet, and they're doing fine. So as long as they don't have to metabolize their blubber, which has toxins from everything, it's a toxic environment out there, and just circulate levels of toxins from their food supply, they're okay. But once you have to start metabolizing blubber to make up for not eating that day, then the toxins affect you. And I think that's what's going on with our southern residents, is that we're getting the effects of toxicity in the reproductive stages and the nursing stages of these females. We know that they're being pregnant at least twice or 3 times as much as the calf survival shows. There's aborts and neonate deaths all over the place. And we're not even counting those in our statistics. But this is one of the things that we need from Lolitas. How often do you ovulate? And if you, it isn't a shortage of males, because they're dying in their pregnancy stages. And in the neonatal stages, the sex is happening. It's not, that's not the problem. Anyway, so I don't know if I had anything else basically to say other than we're putting together all these Chinook harvest things, and you think the fish managers would have that all pretty much together, but it's hard to find. And we're going to just present it to them. If they can't show it to us, we'll show it to them. Yeah, more fish. We got to have at least 4 million Chinook salmon as a goal in this eastern North Pacific ecosystem. Adult fish. You're not going to. The fish people have this way of sliding time scales and sliding who they're counting. Like releasing 10 million smolts is not the same as having 10 million fish come back. They're as adults, but they're edible to whales. Anyway, we've got to stop playing our society has to stop playing cowboys and Indians and politics and economics and spin doctoring and get serious if we want to have these whales in the future. Thank you.